There are shows that are messy on purpose. And then there are shows that look you dead in the eye and say, yeah, I'm going to ruin your afternoon and you're going to thank me for it. Claimed by the alpha nursing his baby is that second kind. It's romantic revenge with werewolf royalty energy. But the part that surprised me is how often it stops being about fangs and dominance and starts being about something way more human. Shame, loneliness, the quiet logistics of survival, and what it does to a person when they have to rebuild a whole self in secret. Welcome back to Flick Flare. If you like long, talky reviews where I spiral a little, but I'm always spiraling toward a point, hit subscribe. Softly, like a polite knock, not a battering ram. And just so you know how we're playing it, I'm doing moderate spoilers. I'm going to talk about the big setup, the general shape of the betrayals, the emotional reunions, the vibe of the pack politics, and the kinds of revelations the show uses to keep twisting the knife. I'm not going to hand you the ending on a plate or go into final stretch specifics that hinge on last-minute reveals. I want you to still have that weight. What? In your pocket if you haven't watched yet. Okay, so this drama's engine is a very classic fuel. A powerful alpha leader, a young woman whose life gets flipped inside out by proximity to that power, a relationship that's not just complicated but actively hazardous, and then the thing that turns the Romans into a time bomb, betrayal, separation, and a child she raises alone while keeping the baby's identity buried like contraband. Years later, the alpha finds out he has a kid and the obsession switches on. Not interest, not curiosity, obsession. And around that central nerve, you've got enemies inside the pack, turning misunderstanding into strategy, power struggles with teeth, and conspiracies that make every conversation feel like it's happening in a room with a hidden microphone. Here's the thing, though, on paper, Alpha discovers secret baby can land like pulpy melodrama if it's handled lazily. This one doesn't always avoid the melodrama. Let's not pretend it's a minimalist indie film, but it understands why people watch this kind of story. It's not for realism. It's for emotional physics, cause and effect. You want to see choices echo. You want to see the bill come due. You want the characters to be forced into the same room with the consequences they try to outrun. And this show is obsessed with consequences, sometimes to an exhausting degree, but mostly in the way that makes you whisper, "No, no, don't say that," right before the character says it. The female lead is the axis. And I'm being careful here because I'm not going to invent details that aren't in the actual text of the show. But the arc as presented is clear. She goes from being emotionally entangled in this alpha's world to being emotionally exiled from it. And then she builds a life that's designed around one mission: keep the child safe, keep the truth hidden, keep herself intact. That keep herself intact part is what I ended up caring about the most. Because the series doesn't frame her independence as a cute personality trait. It frames it as something she bleeds for. Independence isn't a vibe, it's a cost. And the alpha. Look, the alpha character type can be a cardboard cutout if the performance doesn't find the interior. Just possessive, angry, hot, repeat. But this show tries, and often succeeds, at giving him a specific kind of rot under the crown. He's not just powerful. He's surrounded by people who want his power and resent that he has it. Every tender feeling becomes a liability. Every private regret becomes something someone else can weaponize. So when he learns he has a child, the obsession plays two ways at once. On the surface, it's possessive romance. Mine, mine, mine. Under it, it's panic. If he didn't know about his own child, what else don't he know? Who's been lying? Who got close enough to his life to take something that big and keep it from him? And that's where the pack politics actually matter. Because a lesser version of this story would treat the enemies within the pack like background noise. Here, they're not background. They're the weather. The misunderstandings between the couple aren't always accidental. They're encouraged, fertilized, curated by people who benefit from the separation. It creates this pressure cooker sensation where you start to feel like intimacy is a radical act. Like every time the two leads get within breathing distance of honesty, the world leans in to stop them. Now, if you're sitting there thinking, okay, so it's just a bunch of people refusing to talk, I get that fear. I hate that too. Miscommunication plots can feel like being trapped behind someone at the grocery store who won't stop arguing with the self-checkout. But the show mostly dodges that particular annoyance by making the communication problem structural. It's not just that they won't speak, it's that speaking has consequences. Speaking changes power. Speaking gives enemies information. Speaking risks the child. So the silence isn't always dumb silence. Sometimes it's the only weapon the female lead has. And let me tell you, the show uses motherhood in a way that's sharper than I expected. Not saintly, not soft focus. It doesn't romanticize the secret baby as a prop whose only purpose is to glue the couple back together. The baby is a living stake driven into the ground of her life. The child is love, yes, but also fear and routine and hiding, and the constant low hum of what if today is the day everything collapses. That's the tension that kept me locked in more than any clawed hand alpha posturing. So what does this thing feel like to watch? It has that glossy, heightened romance drama sheen, but it's not just pretty for pretty's sake. The visuals lean into contrast. Warmth versus cold, safety versus exposure. You get a lot of intimate framing when the female lead is in her real life, the life she built away from the pack, closer shots, softer edges, a sense of contained space. And then whenever the pack world presses in, the show shifts into harder lines. Bigger rooms, more distance, people placed in frames like pieces on a board. The alpha's empire doesn't feel like home. It feels like a machine that runs on loyalty and suspicion. And the music, when it's good, is quietly manipulative in exactly the right way. It doesn't always scream at you to cry. Sometimes it just lays a thin, anxious thread under a scene and lets you do the rest. Like the score is saying, I'm not going to tell you what to feel, but I will remind you that you're not safe. Here's a moment that really lodged in my ribs, and I'm going to keep it impressionistic on purpose. There's a reunion beat, one of those scenes where the couple ends up in the same orbit again, and you can feel the air change. The camera doesn't rush it. It hangs back just enough to let you see the distance between them as a physical thing. The female lead is doing that controlled stillness, the kind where you're standing upright, but your whole body is braced for impact. The alpha, on the other hand, has this forward momentum that reads like confidence until you catch the microsecond of uncertainty, like he's not sure which version of her he's about to meet. The woman he knew, the woman he hurt, or the stranger who learned how to live without him. And then, in that space between them, you feel the show's central question tighten like a knot. Is this a love story about finding your way back, or a cautionary tale about what power does to intimacy? Because depending on how you tilt your head, it can look like either. And the show is very aware of that tension. It toys with it. I'm going to say something mildly controversial, and I mean it respectfully, because I know how these fandom conversations go. I don't think the most interesting part of this drama is the alpha being possessive. I know, that's the marquee. That's the title energy. But the possessiveness is the obvious flavor. The more interesting thing is watching the female-led refuse, again and again, to let fated become entitled. There are points where the narrative could have made her fold just because destiny says so. And instead it makes her stubborn in a way that feels like self-respect, not plot delay. Sometimes it's frustrating, yes, but it's a frustration that has moral weight. Like, no, you don't get to break someone and then show up years later like a missing puzzle piece. And the show's revenge element is woven into that. Revenge isn't always some grand scheme with a villain monologue. Sometimes revenge is simply not being available. Sometimes revenge is surviving. Sometimes revenge is raising a child in peace while the powerful man who once defined your world has to sit in the discomfort of not being able to control the narrative anymore. That's a very specific kind of satisfaction the series taps into. And it's why the secretly raising the baby portion doesn't feel like dead time to me. It's not dead time. It's the crucible. But wait, because the story does something clever with that satisfaction later. It doesn't let you stay in the simple fantasy of she's free, he suffers. It complicates it with danger, with the reality that hiding the truth creates vulnerabilities, with the reality that enemies who can't get to the alpha directly might try to get to him through what he loves. And that's when the show starts asking uglier questions, the kind that don't have clean answers. When you're protecting your child, how much of your own life are you allowed to lose? When does secrecy turn from shield to prison? The alpha side of the story is, unsurprisingly, full of betrayal. And what I appreciated is that the drama doesn't treat betrayal as a one-time plot twist. It treats it like a system. The alpha lives in a hierarchy where everyone is performing loyalty, and the performance is indistinguishable from the real thing until it suddenly isn't. That creates this really prickly atmosphere in the pack scenes. Even when people are smiling, it feels like they're counting, measuring, calculating what they can take. And the alpha's obsession with finding the mother and baby, again, on paper it could be romantic, it could be creepy, it could be both. The show leans into both, and that's where your mileage may vary. For me, it worked because it didn't pretend obsession is the same as love. It shows you the thrill of the chase, the heat of recognition, the addictive pull of mine, but it also shows you the collateral damage. People get hurt when someone powerful decides wanting something is the same as having a right to it. The series is constantly flirting with that line. And when it's at its best, it's not glamorizing the line, it's illuminating it. There's also something kind of sad about him in the way he's written. Not sad in a poor alpha baby way. Sad in a this man has no idea how to be human without authority way. He's built for dominance, built for leadership, built for command. But parenting, apology, patience, the show makes you watch him try to translate those things through the only language he knows, which is control. And that translation keeps failing, as it should. One of the recurring pleasures of the drama is how it uses jealousy. Not just romantic jealousy, but political jealousy, status jealousy. The kind where someone isn't just mad that you have a person, they're mad that you have a future. And it's not always loud. Sometimes it's a quiet sabotage, a whisper that lands in the wrong ear, an accidental revelation that hits at exactly the wrong time. Those are the moments where the editing really earns its keep. The way it can cut from a tender scene to a watchful face across the room, the way it can hold half a second too long on someone listening, those choices make the world feel paranoid. And paranoia is basically the genre here. Also, can we talk about the title for a second? Claimed by the alpha nursing his baby. It's doing a lot. It's basically a whole synopsis in one breath. And I'll be honest, I went in expecting it to be a little more ridiculous than it is. Like, I expected pure sensationalism. But the nursing element, the mother-child intimacy, the physical reality of raising a baby, it's not just there for shock value. It's there to ground the story in bodies, in need, in dependence, in the fact that underneath pack politics and alpha ego, there is literally a small life that requires care every single day. And that's what makes all the power games feel so grotesque sometimes. Because you're watching adults' posture while a child is the actual stake. Now, performance-wise, the show asks a lot of its leads. The female lead has to carry entire stretches where her strength can't look like swagger. It has to look like restraint. Like holding your face steady while your stomach drops. And when she's good, she's very good. You can see thought flicker behind her eyes before she speaks. You can feel her weighing options in real time. That kind of acting is hard in melodrama because the genre wants big reactions, but the character's survival depends on not having them. So when the cracks finally show, when her voice catches, or her breath changes, or she turns away too quickly, it lands. It lands like a bruise you didn't notice until you touch it. The alpha's performance has a different problem. He has to be intimidating without being a cartoon. He has to be wounded without becoming pitiable. And he has to sell obsession as something that feels inevitable rather than convenient. When the actor leans into stillness, when he lets silence do the threatening, it works. When the writing pushes him into repetitive dominance beats, it can start to feel like the show is circling rather than advancing. But even then, there's usually some small adjustment, a look, a pause, the way his posture changes when the topic of the child comes up, that reminds you there's a person under the title. And I want to linger on the child element without turning this into a morality lecture. But there's a reason the secret child trope hits people so hard. It's not just the drama of the reveal. It's the grief of lost time. It's the idea that years can go missing between two people and there's no way to get them back. Even if they reconcile, even if the romance wins, time doesn't return. The show plays with that ache. And when it does, it becomes something more than just a spicy fantasy. There's a specific kind of scene rhythm this drama likes, the almost reveal. The moment where the truth is right there, on the tip of someone's tongue, in the edge of a gesture, in the way a child reacts to a stranger, in the way an object is held a little too carefully. And the camera will hover. The music will thin out. And you'll find yourself leaning forward like you can physically push the truth into the open. Sometimes it pays off. Sometimes it yanks away at the last second. And yeah, that can be manipulative. It is manipulative. But it's also kind of the point. This story is about people living in the stretch between what they know and what they refuse to admit. If you're a newcomer to this kind of werewolf romance drama, here's the tonal calibration. It's heightened, it's emotional, it's built on archetypes, but it's also trying to do character work inside those archetypes. If you're a fan, you'll recognize the beats, but you'll also notice it doesn't always take the easiest version of them. And if you're a critic type, if you watch these things with your arms crossed, waiting to be annoyed, this show will still probably annoy you sometimes. But it'll also occasionally disarm you with a moment that's too honest to dismiss. Let's talk about the revenge angle again, because this is where the drama's heart actually gets interesting. The female-led's revenge, to me, isn't about making the alpha suffer for fun. It's about rebalancing power. When she's with him in the beginning, she's caught in his gravitational field. After the betrayal and separation, she becomes her own gravity. The secret isn't just a plot device, it's leverage. And the show lets that be morally complicated. Because keeping a child's identity hidden isn't a clean girl boss choice. It's a desperate one. It's a choice made in fear, and fear has a cost. And then the story introduces the pack conspiracies. And suddenly revenge isn't personal anymore, it's political. Because enemies within the pack aren't just villains twirling mustaches. They're people who see the mother and child as a destabilizing force. The alpha having a secret heir? That's a threat to someone's ambition. The mother being outside the pack's control? That's a threat to their narrative. So every emotional beat gets pulled into strategy. Love becomes a vulnerability. Parenting becomes a succession crisis. It's twisted, but it's compelling. Here's the question that kept nagging at me while I watched. Does the show believe these two should be together? Or does it just understand that they can't stop orbiting each other? Those are different things. Chemistry can be a trap. History can be a trap. And sometimes the most romantic thing isn't reunion, it's accountability. The drama toys with all of that. And depending on how you read certain scenes, you can feel the writers wrestling with it in real time. And yes, there are twists. The drama lives on twists. Hidden truths, jealous detonations, timed reveals. I'm staying broad, but the shape is consistent. Whenever the couple gets close to clarity, something external interrupts. A rival, a lie, a half-truth delivered at maximum damage. The show is good at making those interruptions feel like they come from character desire, not just random chaos. People do things because they want something. They want power, they want protection, they want the alpha's favor, they want the female lead gone, they want the child as a symbol. That desire gives the melodrama muscle. But wait, because the most addictive part isn't the external plotting, It's what happens inside the couple's emotional logic when the plotting succeeds. When you watch two people start to believe the worst about each other again. When you watch old wounds reopen like they were never healed, just covered. That's the stuff that makes you keep clicking next episode even when you're tired. I should also admit something about my own reaction, because it shaped how I read the whole thing. I have a low tolerance for romance that treats a woman's autonomy like an obstacle course designed for a man's character development. I just do. It makes my teeth itch. And going into this, with a title like this, I was braced. I was ready to be like, okay, here we go. Another story where claimed is supposed to sound like love. But what surprised me is how often the show lets her autonomy be the point. Not a hurdle. The point. It doesn't always succeed, and there are scenes where the alpha's entitlement pushes the line, but the narrative keeps circling back to her interior life. Her fear, her anger, her quiet pride. That mattered to me. There's a small, almost throwaway kind of humor in the way the show sometimes frames alpha arrogance, too. Not like sitcom jokes. More like, the camera will linger a beat too long on his certainty right before reality embarrasses him. And I'm not above enjoying that. I'm human. I like seeing a powerful man get spiritually humbled by basic facts. Like, you can't command someone into trusting you. Wild concept. The pacing, though, is where I think some viewers will either get hooked or bounce. It's not a straight line. It's a spiral. The show revisits the same emotional injuries from different angles, and that can feel repetitive if you're watching impatiently. But if you let it do what it's doing, you realize the repetition is the point. Trauma is repetitive. Trust rebuilding is repetitive. People don't learn a lesson once and then act perfectly forever. They relapse into old patterns. They get triggered. They overcorrect. The drama leans into that truth, even while dressing it up in genre theatrics. Visually, I also want to give it credit for not making every emotional scene look the same. When it wants intimacy, it compresses space. When it wants power, it expands it. When it wants you to feel watched, it uses distance and framing that suggests someone is always just off screen. That's such a simple tool, but it works. It makes the pack feel like a place where privacy is a myth. And the sound design. Listen, I'm a nerd about this. There are moments where the show pulls back on score and lets you hear the room. The quiet before a confrontation. The way a breath sounds when someone is trying not to cry. The slight shift of fabric when a character turns away. Those details matter in melodrama because they keep it from floating away into pure soap. They anchor the feelings. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you the show is flawless, because it isn't. There are misunderstandings that feel a little too perfectly timed. There are jealousy beats that come in hot and then vanish because the plot has moved on. And sometimes the alpha's obsession is written with this romantic glow that, if you take it literally, could read as the show endorsing behavior that is, let's say, not ideal in real life. But I also think the show trusts the audience to feel that discomfort. It doesn't always resolve it neatly, and that's part of why it lingers. One of the strongest themes running under all the drama is identity. Who gets to name you? Who gets to claim you? Who gets to define your child? Who gets to decide what family means in a world built on hierarchy? The female lead is constantly pushing back against being reduced to a role. Mate, mother, pawn, threat. The alpha is constantly trying to reconcile his roles. Leader, lover, father, weapon. And the pack is this collective force trying to enforce definitions because definitions keep power stable. So when the alpha discovers he has a child, it's not just, oh my god, a baby. It's a destabilizing truth. It changes succession, loyalty, alliances. It changes how people see the female lead. It changes how the alpha sees himself. And the show understands that a child is not just a person in this world. The child is a symbol. And symbols get fought over. And that's where the drama's second chance romance becomes something more tense than cozy. Because second chances in a political environment are not candlelight and apologies. They're negotiations. They're tests. They prove it over and over until the person asking is either satisfied or exhausted. The female leads prove it isn't petty. It's survival math. If she lets him back in and he fails again, the fallout isn't just heartbreak. It's danger for the child. So the romance has stakes that keep it from feeling like a loop. Here's what I want to dig into next, because it's where the show either wins you completely or makes you throw your remote. The way it stages the emotional reunions against the pack's conspiracies, and how it uses jealousy and misunderstanding not just as spies, but as a weapon that different characters wield with terrifying precision. Because the thing is, this drama doesn't just throw misunderstandings at you like confetti. It treats misunderstanding like a currency. Somebody pays, somebody profits. And once you start watching it that way, the whole show gets nastier in a really compelling way. Because suddenly, you're not just asking why don't they talk, you're asking who benefits from them not talking, and how are they making sure it stays that way. The reunions, especially, are staged like traps. Not always literal traps, but emotional ones. The kind where a simple conversation becomes a high-stakes negotiation the second it starts. You'll get that moment where the two leads are finally in the same space, the camera settles, the air feels thicker, and you think, okay, this is it, this is where we clear something up. And then, someone else enters, or a piece of information is delivered in the cruelest possible framing, or the alpha is forced to respond as a leader instead of a man. And you can almost hear the pack world snapping back into place around them like a cage. And what makes it sting is that the show doesn't let either of them be fully right. The female-led's secrecy is understandable, but it's also a wound she's choosing to keep open. The alpha's anger is understandable, but it's also often misdirected. And then the pack characters, enemies, allies, opportunists, keep nudging those misdirections into something sharper. The show is basically saying, if you put love in a system built on dominance and surveillance, love will start to behave like a paranoid animal. It will bite. It will hide. It will lash out when it shouldn't. Now, I want to be careful here, because with moderate spoilers, I can't go beat by beat through every twist, but the general pattern is clear. There's this constant tug-of-war between private truth and public story. The female-led's entire life after separation is built on protecting a private truth. The alpha's position is built on controlling a public story. And those two philosophies just grind against each other. Even if they want the same thing, they're trained to pursue it in opposite ways. She protects by disappearing. He protects by expanding control until there are no blind spots left. And if you've ever been in any kind of relationship, romantic, familial, whatever, where one person's coping mechanism is to retreat and the other person's coping mechanism is to chase, you already know how ugly that dance can get. It's not cute. It's not of, he cares. It's exhausting. It's two nervous systems firing at each other like opposing alarms. Wait, because this matters later. The show is very smart about how it frames obsession. It doesn't just frame it as desire. It frames it as a worldview. The alpha doesn't become obsessed because he's suddenly sentimental. He becomes obsessed because the existence of the child is proof that the world can happen without his permission. That's terrifying to someone who's been taught that control equals safety. So when he goes looking, when he starts trying to pull the mother and baby back into his sphere, it's not just romance. It's him trying to repair a crack in his reality. And on the mother's side, the secrecy isn't just fear of him. It's fear of the whole machine around him. This is something I appreciated. The show understands that even if the alpha himself becomes safe, the world he runs might never be. The pack's conspiracies, the power struggles, the opportunists looking for leverage, none of that disappears just because he's having big feelings. So her caution reads less like stubbornness and more like competence. She's been paying attention. One of the most effective things the drama does is make you feel the constant presence of eyes. Not literal eyes all the time, but the sense that everything is being observed, interpreted, weaponized. The cinematography helps with that. You'll get these compositions where characters are framed through doorways, through windows, partially blocked by foreground objects, like the camera itself is spying. Or you'll get a scene where the leads are finally alone, but the background is just a little too open, the space just a little too exposed, and you don't trust it. The show trains you not to trust it. And this is where jealousy becomes a plot engine rather than a side dish. Jealousy isn't just, I want you, not her. It's, I want the position you have. It's, I want the legitimacy you represent. It's, I want the alpha's attention, and you're stealing it by existing. And because the alpha is a leader, attention is power. Who he favors is political. Who he protects is a statement. That's why every moment of tenderness has an audience in this show, even if that audience isn't in the room. They're a kind of scene the drama loves to play, where someone says something that's technically true but framed to destroy. That is such a specific cruelty. Not a lie you can debunk. A truth you can't escape, just recontextualize. And because the female lead is hiding the biggest truth of all, she's vulnerable to smaller truths being used as knives. The show uses that to keep the tension hot. It's like watching someone try to carry water in their hands while people keep bumping their elbows. And I know some viewers love the alpha's possessive romance as the main course. Totally fair. If you're here for the I will burn the world to get what's mine energy, this show serves it. But my surprising take goes further than what I said earlier. Sometimes the alpha's possessiveness is actually the least romantic thing about him. There are moments where the show almost accidentally reveals that his softer impulses, the ones he doesn't know how to express, are the only parts of him that feel like they could sustain a real relationship. And the tragedy is, he keeps trying to use the wrong tools. He keeps reaching for command when he needs to reach for humility. And the show lets that failure be painful instead of sexy. That's also where the acting choices start to matter a lot. Because if the alpha is played as pure swagger, the character becomes unbearable. But when the actor allows those tiny breaks, when the voice tightens, when the jaw sets not in anger but in restraint, when the eyes flick away like he can't stand to feel watched while feeling vulnerable, you start to read him differently. You start to see the man behind the alpha. Not to excuse him, to understand why he keeps making the same mistakes. And with the female lead, the performance has to carry this double life. She has to be fine in public. She has to be strong in front of her child. She has to be careful in front of the pack. And then, in the private moments, you get the exhaustion, the grief, the kind of fear that isn't loud. It's just always there. A lot of dramas would let her cry in big, cathartic ways all the time. This one saves it. So when she does crack, it feels earned. Here's a small sensory detail that stuck with me from the way the show frames her isolation. It often emphasizes routine. Not in a boring way, but in a grounding way. The repetition of care. The sense that her life is built around tiny, unglamorous acts of protection. And when the pack world intrudes, it's like someone throws mud across a clean floor. You feel the violation. You feel the, I worked so hard for peace and you brought chaos to my doorstep. Now, because this is a romantic revenge drama, it's not content to just sit in quiet realism. It wants to spike your adrenaline. And so the conspiracies and power struggles come in like these waves that keep knocking the characters off balance. Sometimes you can see the wave coming. Sometimes it hits from the side. And what makes it fun? Yes, fun, even when it's cruel, is that the show doesn't treat the pack as a monolith. There are layers. There are factions. There are people pretending to be loyal while quietly building their own little ladder. That complexity makes the world feel active, not just like a static backdrop for romance. But okay, let's talk about the romance itself, because I can't keep circling it like it's a bomb. The chemistry is built on history. That's the vibe. It's not meet cute, butterflies, new love. It's we already know how this feels. And that's the problem. Their scenes have this constant undertone of memory. Even when they're angry, you can feel what they used to be. That's what gives the second chance angle its punch. Second chances aren't just about love returning, they're about time collapsing. You're suddenly back in the emotional weather of your past, whether you like it or not. And the show leans hard into the idea that love can be both refuge and weapon. A refuge because it's the only place these characters feel seen. A weapon because being seen makes you vulnerable. So the romance scenes are rarely pure comfort. There's always an edge, a threat. Don't trust this moment too much. Wait, there's another layer here that I didn't expect to care about as much as I did. The question of what family means in a world like this. Because the pack isn't just a setting, it's an ideology. It's a structure that tells you who you belong to, who you owe, what you are allowed to want. And the female-led's little private family, her and the child, becomes this quiet rebellion against that ideology. It's her saying, I get to define my own belonging. Which, again, is why the alpha's obsession isn't just romantic. It's political. He's trying to fold that rebellion back into the system. And because this is werewolf-themed, the drama is playing with the primal versus civilized tension constantly. Not always with literal transformations or anything like that. Again, I'm not going to invent specifics, but with behavior, with the idea of instinct. The alpha embodies instinct in a socially sanctioned way. His dominance is considered natural. The female-led's protectiveness is also instinct, but it's treated like defiance. That imbalance is part of the show's subtext, and it's one of the reasons the romance can feel both intoxicating and unsettling. There's a scene type the show returns to, a confrontation where the alpha wants to assert authority and the female-led refuses to respond like a subordinate. And you can feel the room react, even if it's just the tension in the air, even if no one says anything. It's like she's breaking an unspoken rule by standing there with her spine intact. Those scenes are some of my favorites because they're not just about the couple. They're about the world's expectations snapping and creaking under pressure. And it's in those moments where the sound design really shines. The show knows when to strip away the music and let you hear the silence as its own kind of violence. The quiet after a line lands. The pause before someone answers. The way the atmosphere shifts when the alpha's patience thins. Silence becomes a threat. Not because someone's going to attack necessarily, but because silence is where power decides what it's going to do next. Now, I'll admit, there were points where I wanted the show to stop twisting the knife and just let a conversation happen. I'm not made of stone. I like payoff. I like relief. And this drama sometimes withholds relief like it's allergic to it. But when I sat with it, I realized that the lack of relief is part of the emotional experience it's trying to build. It wants you to feel the way these characters live, always braced, always waiting for the next shoe. That's immersive, but it's also taxing. So if you're the type of viewer who needs a steady diet of catharsis, this one might have you pacing around your living room like a stressed out auntie at a family reunion. And speaking of catharsis, the revenge element creates its own kind of delayed release. Because revenge in this story isn't always explosive. It's slow, it's strategic, it's survival based. And that can be satisfying in a different way. Instead of gotcha moments every episode, you get this long, simmering sense of balance shifting. The female-led gains ground by refusing to be controlled. The alpha loses ground by realizing he can't force his way into being forgiven. But the show is not purely on her side either. And this is where I think it's more interesting than people might initially give it credit for. It doesn't paint her secrecy as purely virtuous. It shows you the consequences. Not in a moralizing way, but in a realistic way. Secrets create gaps. Gaps invite narratives. Narratives invite manipulation. And the longer the truth stays hidden, the more violent the reveal becomes, not necessarily physically violent, but emotionally. Like ripping off a bandage that's fused to the skin. So when the alpha starts closing in, the tension becomes almost unbearable. Because it's not just will he find them. It's what happens to the life she built when he does. And the show is really good at making you care about that life. It gives it texture. It doesn't treat it like a waiting room for the real plot. It feels like an actual life with its own value. So the alpha's arrival isn't automatically romantic. It's invasive, even if it's also desired on some buried level. That contradiction is the spice. Let's talk about obsession again, because I think the show's doing a sneaky thing with it. In a lot of romances, obsession is framed as devotion. Here, obsession is framed as a symptom of fear, insecurity, wounded pride, and genuine longing all tangled together. And the reason that matters is that it changes what you're rooting for. Instead of rooting for obsession to win, you start rooting for obsession to evolve, to soften into something that can coexist with another person's autonomy. And that brings me to one of the drama's most interesting quiet themes: consent. Not just romantic consent, but narrative consent. Who gets to decide the story of this family? Who gets to decide what the child represents? Who gets to decide what claim means? The title wants you to believe claimed is romantic. The show keeps asking, okay, but claimed by whom and at what cost? Wait, because here's where the pack conspiracies get almost Shakespearean in a trashy, delicious way. When you introduce an heir, secret or not, you introduce succession anxiety. People start imagining futures. They start placing bets. They start trying to control outcomes. And when you have a leader who's already under threat from within, the existence of a child becomes a pressure point. It's not just about love, it's about legitimacy. And legitimacy is blood in these stories, literally and symbolically. So every time the alpha shows interest in the child's existence, even just as a concept, you can feel other characters recalculating. Not always openly. Sometimes it's in the way they suddenly become helpful. Sometimes it's in the way they suddenly become hostile. The show plays with that social shift in a way that's genuinely engaging. It reminds you that in a power structure, babies are never just babies. Their future, their bargaining chips, their threats. And as someone who usually rolls their eyes at baby as plot device, I have to give this show credit for making the child feel like more than a key to unlock a romance. The child is used to reflect the adults, yes, but the show also uses the child to expose their hypocrisy. The alpha can command an empire, but can't command trust. The mother can protect her child, but can't protect herself from being pulled back into old emotional gravity. The pack can claim loyalty, but can't tolerate anything it can't control. Here's where I got weirdly emotional, and I didn't expect to. There are moments where the mother's fear isn't dramatic. It's quiet. It's that feeling of looking at your sleeping child and realizing that everything you've built could be taken in one day if the wrong person decides you don't deserve it. That hit me. I'm not even going to pretend I was chill about it. Because regardless of the werewolf fantasy framing, that fear is real in a lot of people's lives in different forms. The show taps into that, and it's why it can feel heavier than the genre packaging suggests. And then, to keep you from drowning in heaviness, the drama occasionally gives you these sharp, satisfying moments where the female lead asserts a boundary so cleanly you can almost hear the room go quiet. Those moments are like oxygen. They're like, yes, thank you, we needed that. And the best part is, the show doesn't always make those boundary moments triumphant. Sometimes they're lonely. Sometimes she sets a boundary and then has to sit with the cost of it. That's real. Now, for newcomers, let me say this. The werewolf alpha theme here is not about lore complexity. It's about metaphor. It's about power dynamics. If you're coming in expecting intricate rules, you might not get that. What you will get is the fantasy of hierarchy used as a pressure cooker for romance and revenge. The alpha isn't interesting because of supernatural mechanics. He's interesting because he's a walking institution. He's authority with a face. And critics, because I know some of you are watching this genre like you're grading homework, the writing is not subtle, but it is intentional. It knows what it's doing with archetypes. It's using them as a language. And within that language, it occasionally does something surprisingly sharp, like letting a character's silence be the loudest thing in the scene, or framing a romantic gesture as both comfort and threat depending on who's watching. Also, I need to talk about the editing rhythm because it's part of why the tension works. The show likes to cut away at the exact moment you want to linger. That can be maddening, but it also mirrors the character's experience. They don't get to linger in peace either. Every moment is interrupted by duty, danger, suspicion. So the editing becomes thematic. Again, immersive, but taxing. If you binge it, you might feel like you've been emotionally shaken like a soda can. And when it does linger, it chooses its spots. It lingers on faces, on the micro shifts in expression when someone hears something they weren't supposed to hear, when someone's jealousy flares and they swallow it, when the alpha's composure cracks for half a second and he clamps down again. Those are the moments that make the performances feel layered instead of soap operatic. Now, let's zoom in on the misunderstandings, because this is where the show's twists actually become character tests. A misunderstanding isn't just a plot obstacle, it's a mirror. When the alpha believes the worst, it reveals what he still thinks he's entitled to. When the mother assumes he'll always choose power over tenderness, it reveals the scar he left. And when the pack characters exploit those assumptions, it reveals how well they understand the couple's weak points. It's like watching people play emotional chess with live ammunition. And that's why the conspiracies don't feel tacked on. They feel like the natural consequence of putting love in a hostile environment. The enemies within the pack aren't just evil, they're opportunistic. They see a fracture and they pry. They see a secret and they hunt for it. And the alpha's obsession makes it worse because obsession is noisy. Obsession leaves a trail. It signals to everyone around him that something important is happening, which invites interference. Wait, this is where the show starts to play a particularly cruel game with public affection versus private devotion. Because if the alpha shows public interest in the mother, he puts a target on her back. If he doesn't, he leaves her unprotected. There's no clean move. The mother, meanwhile, has to decide whether being acknowledged by him is safety or danger. And the show squeezes that dilemma until it squeaks. There's also an interesting emotional asymmetry in how they experience the past. For the alpha, the past is something he wants to reclaim. For the mother, the past is something she survived. Those are not the same emotional relationship to memory. So when he tries to reach for nostalgia, it can land like salt in a wound. And when she refuses nostalgia, it can land like punishment. The show uses that mismatch to generate friction that feels, honestly, pretty true to life. And because this is romantic revenge, you also get the theme of second chances interrogated. The show isn't just like, love conquers all. It's like, okay, but what does love look like after betrayal? Does it look like apology? Does it look like accountability? Does it look like change that lasts longer than a crisis? The alpha can be passionate all day. The question is whether he can be consistent. And the show, to its credit, doesn't let consistency be easy. I'm going to make another slightly contrarian argument, and this one might annoy people who love the alpha fantasy. I don't think the show is actually at its strongest when the alpha is in full "I will take what's mine" mode. I think it's strongest when he's forced into a corner where dominance doesn't work, when the mother doesn't flinch, when the pack doesn't obey, when the truth refuses to be controlled. Those are the scenes where you see whether the character has any adaptability. And watching a man built for command confront a problem that requires gentleness, that's drama. And it's also where the romance becomes more than heat. Because heat without growth is just repetition. It's a loop. The show flirts with that loop sometimes, and you can feel it when it happens. But then it will give you a scene where the alpha's anger collapses into something like regret, and you're like, okay, there we go. There's the human. Don't lose him. The female leads independence, meanwhile, is portrayed as both strength and isolation. And I appreciated that nuance. Because sometimes these stories treat independence like a perfect shield. But in reality, independence can be lonely. It can be a wall you build that keeps out danger and also keeps out comfort. And the show lets you see her loneliness without framing it as she needs a man. It frames it as she deserves rest. She deserves someone else to carry weight sometimes. That's a different emotional claim. Now, let's talk about the pack as a character, because it kind of is. The pack is tradition. The pack is patriarchy. The pack is a social network that can either protect you or destroy you depending on your position. And the show uses that collective presence to make the romance feel pressured. There's always a sense that even if the couple reconciles, they'll have to reconcile in public, under rules, under scrutiny, under the threat of someone else's agenda. And when you add the revenge element, you get this delicious tension. The mother's revenge is partly about refusing the pack's narrative. But the pack's revenge, because yes, the pack can take revenge too, is about punishing anyone who refuses it. That's where the power struggle becomes personal. It's not just who will lead. It's who will be allowed to exist outside the system. The show also uses jealousy to test the mother's self-worth. Not in a cheap way where she's constantly comparing herself to other women, but in the way that the world around her keeps trying to tell her she's replaceable, that she's a past mistake, that she's a weakness. And every time she refuses that messaging, it's a tiny act of rebellion. That's satisfying to watch, especially in a genre that can sometimes love humiliating its heroines for drama points. And look, I'm not going to pretend there aren't moments where the drama does pull some soap moves. There are scenes that hinge on someone overhearing the wrong half of a conversation, or someone showing up at the worst time, or information being withheld in ways that are obviously designed to keep the plot alive. It happens. But I'll give it this, even when it uses those moves, it usually wraps them in emotional truth. The characters react in ways that make sense for who they are. The mother reacts like someone who's been punished for trust before. The alpha reacts like someone who's never learned how to be powerless. Wait, because here's a sneaky craft thing. The show often uses physical distance as a stand-in for emotional distance. Scenes where they're close physically but miles apart emotionally are shot one way. And scenes where they're far physically but emotionally tethered are shot another. The blocking is doing storytelling. Sometimes they'll be in the same room and never share the same frame, and it feels like a divorce in visual form. Other times, the editing will cut between them in separate locations with similar lighting or similar sound texture, and you feel the connection like a thread. The music also has this habit of swelling right as you think a scene is going to go tender, and then undercutting itself with a sharp note or a cut to a hostile face. It's like the score is refusing to let you relax. And again, that can be exhausting, but it's also effective. It keeps the show's emotional register from flattening. Another element I want to highlight is how the show handles the idea of truth. Truth isn't presented as a single clean reveal that fixes everything. Truth is messy. Truth has timing. Truth has consequences. Truth can be used as a weapon depending on who speaks it and when. The mother's truth about the child, about the past, has been kept private for protection. The pack's truths are often rumors dressed up as certainty. The alpha's truth is often whatever he needs to believe to keep moving. So when truths collide, it's not catharsis, it's chaos. And that's what makes the emotional reunions hit so hard when they do land. Because when you finally get a moment of genuine connection between the leads, when you get a second where the past isn't being used as a weapon, when you get a second where the alpha isn't performing leadership and the mother isn't performing invulnerability, it feels like a tiny miracle, like a candle lit in a windy room. You're not sure it'll stay lit, but you're grateful it exists. Now, I want to talk about the revenge flavor again in relation to the alpha, because people always assume revenge is the heroine's domain in these stories. But the alpha is also on a revenge track. He's betrayed within his own empire. There are conspiracies. There are power plays. And his desire to find the mother and child isn't just romantic. It's also about consolidating control, about removing vulnerabilities, about punishing whoever kept this from him. That revenge can be righteous in the "you lied to me" sense, but it can also be scary because of the scale of power he has. The show plays with that ambiguity, and it's a big reason the tone stays tense. And there's something almost tragic about him, wanting to be a father through the lens of vengeance. Because fatherhood should soften a person, ideally. But if you enter fatherhood like it's a war, you're going to bring war into the child's life. The show hints at that risk, and it's one of the things that keeps the romance from being purely escapist. You can feel the stakes of the child's emotional future, not just the adult's love story. I also want to acknowledge something that I think some viewers might find frustrating, but I found kind of compelling. The show doesn't always give you clear villains and heroes. Yes, there are enemies within the pack. Yes, there are conspirators. But the emotional damage isn't always coming from cartoon evil. Sometimes it's coming from people making choices out of fear, jealousy, insecurity, ambition. Very human motives. That makes the world feel more believable even when the romance is heightened. And then, because the show is a drama, it will occasionally do that thing where it builds up a confrontation and you're like, yes, finally, say the thing, burn it down, and then it sidesteps. It postpones. It creates a new misunderstanding. And I'm not going to lie to you. I groaned a couple times, like, out loud, alone in my room, just me and my poor life choices. But then I'd find myself still watching because the emotional undercurrent was doing its job. The show had made me care about the cost of the truth, not just the thrill of it. Wait, let me zoom in on a mini moment that I think encapsulates the show's whole vibe without getting too specific. They're a kind of quiet domestic beat with the mother and child. One of those moments that's almost too normal for this chaotic story. Soft light, small gestures, the rhythm of care. And then there's a cut, or a shift, or an intrusion, maybe just a sound, a knock, a message, an implication that reminds you this piece is temporary. And the mother's entire body changes. Shoulders tighten, face goes still, eyes go alert. It's like watching someone switch from parent to protector in half a second. That transformation is the heart of the show for me. That's the drama. Not the fangs, not the growls. That. And it's also why the romance is so loaded. Because the alpha wants access to that private world she built. And she's not just guarding it from him. She's guarding it from what he represents. She's guarding it from the system that comes with him. So every time he reaches for her, there's this invisible question hanging in the air. Are you reaching for me? Or are you reaching for control? The show asks that question again and again in different ways. Sometimes with tenderness. Sometimes with anger. Sometimes with jealousy. Sometimes with revenge. And if you're watching casually, you might just feel it as tension. But if you're watching closely, you can see the writing trying to interrogate the romance fantasy rather than just deliver it. Now, something I haven't touched enough yet is how the show uses misunderstandings to explore pride. Pride is basically a third main character. The alpha's pride as a leader. The mother's pride as a survivor. Their pride keeps them from asking for what they need in clean ways. It makes them interpret vulnerability as weakness. And because the pack world rewards pride, rewards dominance, rewards control, there's no external incentive for them to soften. Softness is punished in this world. So when softness appears, it feels rare and precious. And that's why the emotional reunions have that don't blink quality. You're watching for softness like it's a rare animal crossing the road. You're like, please don't scare it off. Please don't ruin it. And then, inevitably, something spooks it. Someone says the wrong thing. Someone takes a step too close. Someone remembers the betrayal. And the softness bolts. I'll say this. If you're a fan of the genre, the show gives you the stuff you came for. Possessive romance, second chances, jealousy, revenge, hidden truths, conspiracies. It's not shy. But if you're someone who wants more than surface level heat, the show's best scenes are the ones where it admits that love under a hierarchy is not free. It costs. It constrains. It warps. And here's where I want to go next, because I think it's one of the most interesting elements of the entire series. The way the show positions the child not just as a secret, but as a mirror that forces both leads to confront who they are when no one is watching and who they are when everyone is watching. Because those are two different selves in this story, and the tension between them is basically what keeps the whole thing alive. Alive. That's the right word for it. Because the child isn't just a secret you drag behind you like a suitcase. The child is this living, breathing mirror that keeps bouncing the adult's worst instincts right back into their faces. And the show, at its best, understands that a kid in a story like this isn't there to be cute. The kid is there to force a choice. Over and over. Who are you when you're tired? Who are you when you're scared? Who are you when you have power? Who are you when you suddenly don't? The mother's choices start to read like an entire philosophy. She's not just hiding. She's curating an environment. She's building a small world where the rules are simple. Food, warmth, calm, safety, routine. And then the pack world is the opposite. Surveillance, hierarchy, tests, punishments, reward systems, loyalty theater. So the child becomes the point of collision. The child is proof that the mother's world is real and worth defending, and also proof that the alpha's world will never stop reaching for what it thinks belongs to it. And the alpha, the second the child becomes real in his mind, starts behaving like someone who's found a missing organ. That's the energy. Not just, I want. It's, I should have had this. It's this furious grief that comes out sideways. And there's something almost mortifying about watching a grown man with an empire react to the idea of fatherhood like it's a theft. Because it is a theft from his perspective. But the show keeps nudging you. Okay, but if it was stolen from you, what did you steal first? What did you do that made secrecy the safer option? Wait, because this is where the show gets sharper than it looks. The secret baby trope usually positions the reveal as the ultimate romantic payoff. Like, once he knows, everything will realign, and we all get to exhale. This drama doesn't let you exhale that easily. It treats the reveal, or even the approach toward the reveal, as a destabilizer. It's a grenade rolled into the room. Because knowledge doesn't equal trust, and information doesn't equal safety. If anything, information attracts predators in a world like this. The moment the child becomes known, the child becomes valuable in the most dangerous way. One of the reasons this lands is that the series keeps returning to the mother's protective instinct as something sacred but also heavy. You can love your kid so much you become a fortress. And fortresses don't feel good to live inside. That's the loneliness the show lets seep in around the edges. It's not constantly crying on the floor loneliness. It's the quieter kind. The way she has to scan rooms, the way she chooses words like she's defusing a bomb, the way she can't fully relax even in moments that should be soft. And then, in contrast, the alpha's protective instinct is portrayed as something that he assumes will be received as a gift. Like, of course you want the protection of the most powerful man in the room. Of course you want the pack's resources. Of course you want the fortress of status. And the mother's whole existence is this living rebuttal. Protection that comes with ownership isn't protection, it's another cage. So whenever he offers protection, there's an unspoken negotiation happening. What do you want in exchange? What do you expect me to give up? What part of myself are you trying to purchase? That's why the show's emotional core isn't actually, will they get back together? It's, can they ever agree on what love is supposed to cost? Because for him, love has historically cost power. It's a vulnerability. For her, love has historically cost safety. It's a risk. And those are different cost systems. People don't just merge those smoothly. They clash. Something else I found myself appreciating the longer I sat with it is the way the show uses years later as an emotional texture rather than just a time skip. You can feel the years. The mother's independence isn't theoretical, it's practiced. It's muscle, it's habit. And habits don't dissolve because someone from your past shows up with longing and regret. Meanwhile, the alpha's regret doesn't erase his instincts either. His instincts are trained by leadership. He's used to being obeyed. He's used to the world moving when he speaks. So when he speaks to her and the world doesn't move, when she doesn't move, his whole identity rattles. That's where the drama lies. Wait, let me put a pin in that rattling identity, because it becomes the key to how the show handles redemption. A lot of these alpha stories want redemption without humiliation. They want the man to apologize, but still look cool doing it. This show, sometimes it gives you that, but sometimes it forces him into an uglier posture. Not just, I'm sorry. More like, I don't know how to be this person, and it's terrifying. And I know that might sound like me being generous, but it's in the way the scenes are staged. The alpha is often most human when he's not winning. Now, I've seen some people react to the possessive romance element like it's the whole point, and I get it. It's fantasy. It's meant to be intense. But I think there's another fantasy running parallel that's actually more subversive. The fantasy of a woman refusing to be rewritten by a powerful man's regret. That's intoxicating in its own way. Watching her hold onto her selfhood when the world tries to label her as mate, mother, pawn, threat. It scratches a different itch. It's not just hot, it's validating. And yes, the show does indulge in the mine language, the claiming, the obsession. But I kept noticing how often the camera chooses the mother's reaction over the alpha's declaration. That matters. It's the difference between a story that celebrates control and a story that interrogates it. If the camera lingered only on him, only on his intensity, you'd have a different show. But the cut to her face, her skepticism, her anger, her fear, her occasional flicker of longing she refuses to name, that cut is the moral center. Wait, because if you're a newcomer and you're thinking, okay, is this going to be one of those dramas where the mother is punished endlessly until she learns her place? No, not in the way the worst versions of this trope do. She suffers, absolutely, because the genre demands suffering like oxygen. But the suffering isn't framed as deserved. It's framed as what happens when you're a person trying to keep a child safe in a world that treats children as political assets. That's a crucial difference. The shows pack politics, too, keep threading back into the child. Every conspiracy, every power struggle, every misunderstanding is intensified by the existence of an heir. And what I like is that the drama doesn't always make the conspirators feel omnipotent. Sometimes they're messy. Sometimes they overplay their hand. Sometimes they're driven by petty jealousy rather than grand strategy. That messiness makes the political side feel less like chess masters and more like actual people scrambling for advantage. They're a specific type of manners the show does well, social manners. Not the obvious, someone's going to attack manners, but that someone is smiling while they corner you manners. The kind where politeness becomes a weapon. The kind where a conversation feels friendly until you realize every question is a probe. And for the mother, that's horrifying because her whole life is built on not being probed. She's built a life where she can be invisible. And the alpha's world doesn't allow invisibility. It punishes it. In his world, being unseen is suspicious. And the alpha, ironically, is surrounded by people but constantly unseen as a person. Everyone sees the title. Everyone sees the authority. Everyone sees the future they want from him. So when he fixates on the mother and child, it's not just him wanting to control them. It's also him wanting one place where he's not performing. That's the tragedy. He's reaching for intimacy using the language of possession because he doesn't know any other language that feels safe. Let me give you a mini-scene retelling that captures this, and I'm keeping it general, but I want you to feel it the way I felt it. There's a moment, one of those pivotal, hush-the-room moments, where the alpha gets close enough to the mother's private world, that he's suddenly confronted with the physical reality of it. Not the concept of a child. The reality, the quiet, the softness, the small sounds that only exist in domestic spaces. The kind of ambient noise that leadership chambers don't have. The camera sits in this intimate distance, close enough that you can see the mother's breathing change, the way her body shifts instinctively like she's shielding without even thinking. And there's the child, present, vulnerable, completely unaware of the politics they're born into. The mother is doing something ordinary and deeply intimate, the kind of care act that's both mundane and sacred. The title makes you expect that this will be sensationalized, but what struck me is that the show plays it like a violation and a revelation at the same time. The alpha's face. It's not just desire, it's shock. Like he's seeing a whole universe he didn't know existed, and his first instinct is to claim it because he doesn't know how to honor it without taking it. And the sound design in that kind of scene matters. You can hear the room. You can hear how quiet it is. And then you hear the alpha's presence in that quiet, his breath, his stillness, his restraint trying to hold back his instincts. The music, if it comes in at all, comes in like a thin wire, not a flood. Because if the score went big, it would tell you what to feel. Instead, the show lets you sit in the discomfort. It lets you feel the mother's terror that this private moment is being observed, and it lets you feel the alpha's grief that he missed all of it. Wait, here's the payoff of why that matters. That kind of scene reframes the entire romance. It's no longer just two people in love. It's two people with radically different relationships to vulnerability. The mother's vulnerability has been exploited before, so she hides it. The alpha's vulnerability has been dangerous in his world, so he armors it with dominance. And the child is this raw vulnerability placed between them. Of course it's tense. Of course it's messy. There's no way to make that clean. What the show does, in the middle stretch, is keep forcing these characters into proximity without giving them the luxury of privacy. And I think that's one of the reasons it's so addictive. It's not just the will they want they. It's the will they but can they with everyone watching. Because when everyone is watching, love becomes performance. And performance creates resentment. The mother resents being used as a symbol. The alpha resents not being able to be just a man. The pack resents anything that threatens the status quo. And then the misunderstandings come back, like clockwork. But they don't feel like pure writer convenience to me. They feel like the natural outcome of a world where information is weaponized. If you've ever been in an environment, workplace, family, social group, where people twist your words the moment you leave the room, you know how quickly misunderstandings multiply. Now imagine that environment, but with power, hierarchy, and a child who represents future authority. That's this show's anxiety in a nutshell. Wait, because I want to dig into one of the drama's most interesting tricks. It uses romance tropes as camouflage for a story about governance. I'm serious. The alpha's romantic obsession is also a leadership crisis. The mother's independence is also a threat to institutional control. The child is an heir, which is a political object. The conspiracies aren't just villains. They're the normal behavior of people in a system that rewards manipulation. If you watch the show through that lens, a lot of the melodrama becomes not realistic, but coherent. And that's why, even when the show does something that's clearly designed to spike your heart rate, it still feels like it belongs. Like, yes, of course jealousy would show up here. Of course rivals would exploit romantic vulnerability. Of course misunderstandings would be curated. Of course a powerful man's private life would become public spectacle. It's the curse of being the center of a hierarchy. Your love life isn't yours. It's everyone's business. And the mother is the only one who's trying to keep it private, which makes her the enemy of the system. One of my favorite under-the-radar things the show does is the way it frames the mother's no in a lot of romances. No is treated like a temporary obstacle. Here, no is treated like a real boundary. The alpha may push against it, the narrative may pressure it, but the mother's refusal is given weight. It's not always respected immediately because the alpha is who he is and the show is not pretending otherwise, but it is treated as meaningful. That's a subtle but important difference in how the romance feels. Wait, because I can already hear someone going, yeah, but he's still possessive. Yes, he is. And if that's a deal breaker for you, it's okay. It's okay to not enjoy that fantasy. But what I'm saying is, the show doesn't ask you to pretend the possessiveness is pure. It often frames it as problematic even while indulging it. That contradiction is part of why the show sparks debate. It's not a clean endorsement. It's an exploration with a lot of messy pleasure baked in. Now, can we talk about the idea of second chances in the context of revenge? Because those two concepts are always in a fist fight in this drama. A second chance is about reopening. Revenge is about closing. A second chance says, maybe we can be different. Revenge says, I'll never forget. And the mother is pulled between those impulses constantly. She wants to protect her child, which sometimes means closing the door on the alpha forever. But she also has a history with him that won't die. And the show doesn't pretend history is easy to bury. The alpha, meanwhile, wants a second chance, but also wants vengeance on the people who betrayed him and kept the truth from him. So he's trying to build a family with one hand while burning down enemies with the other. That's not stability. That's chaos wearing a crown. Wait, here's where I got unexpectedly sympathetic to a character type I usually side-eye. The powerful man who doesn't know how to be gentle. Usually that trope annoys me because it becomes an excuse. But in this show, when it works, it's not an excuse, it's a tragedy. You can see how the alpha's environment has trained him. You can see how every act of softness would be exploited by someone watching. And you can see how that training has made him emotionally clumsy. He's not clumsy in combat or politics. He's clumsy in intimacy. And intimacy is the one arena where his usual tools fail. The show stages those failures in ways that are often surprisingly intimate. You'll have scenes where the alpha tries to do something that would, in his world, be considered protective, and the mother reads it as a threat. And both readings make sense. That's what makes it good drama. No one is reacting irrationally. They're reacting according to their lived experience. The alpha has learned that protection equals control. The mother has learned that control equals danger. So they collide. Wait, let's pivot to craft again. Because I don't want this to turn into pure character psychology without giving the show credit for the way it physically tells the story. The lighting choices often do a lot of emotional work. The mother's private scenes tend to have this softer, warmer palette, but it's not always cozy. Sometimes it's warm in a way that feels fragile, like a lamp in a storm. The pack scenes tend to be cooler, sharper, more metallic. Even when they're in luxurious spaces, they feel cold. It's like the wealth is sterile. That contrast reinforces the idea that the mother's life is real and lived in, while the alpha's world is performative and strategic. The camera movement also shifts. In private scenes, you get more stillness, more patience. In pack scenes, there's more tension in the frame, subtle movement, slight reframing, the feeling the camera is searching for the person who's lying. And the editing is tuned to paranoia. Cuts often come a fraction of a second earlier than you want, which keeps you uneasy. It's like the show refuses to let you settle into comfort. Again, immersive, a little exhausting, but it serves the story. Now, a theme that's woven through all of this is the idea of identity as something contested. The mother's identity is contested by the pack's labels. The alpha's identity is contested by the conspiracies and betrayals that undermine his authority. The child's identity is literally hidden, and therefore becomes the ultimate contested object. Who is this child? What do they represent? Who gets to claim them? The show keeps pressing on that. It's not subtle, but it's effective. Wait, this is also where the title becomes a kind of provocation. Claimed. Nursing. His baby. The possessive pronoun is doing work. The show is daring you to accept that framing. Is the baby his? Biologically, yes. But does biology automatically grant ownership? That's the question simmering under every possessive line. And the show, in my reading, doesn't give you a simple answer. It gives you conflict. It gives you characters who believe different things about what parenthood means. And speaking of parenthood, I want to talk about how the show treats the mother's labor. There's a respect in the way it portrays the daily grind. It's not glamorized. It's not used only as a tearjerker. It's shown as work. Emotional work, physical work, mental work. The mother is constantly calculating risk, constantly managing, constantly performing normalcy for the child while carrying fear underneath. That's not just strong heroine stuff. That's survival. And the show doesn't always make her perfect, which I appreciate. There are moments where her fear turns into sharpness, where her protectiveness becomes controlling in its own way, where her independence becomes a wall that also blocks potential help. That imperfection makes her feel like a person instead of a symbol. It also keeps the moral terrain interesting, because if she were always right and always calm and always noble, the drama would flatten. Instead, she's complicated. She can be unfair. She can be stubborn. She can be exhausted. She can make choices that create new problems. That's good writing in this genre. Wait has a different contrarian take. I actually think the show's twists are less important than the way it handles aftermath. A lot of twisty dramas are addicted to the reveal and bored by the consequences. This one, when it's in its groove, lingers on consequence. It lingers on how a betrayal changes someone's posture, how a misunderstanding changes the way they interpret the next conversation, how a lie doesn't just end when it's exposed, it leaves residue. That residue is what makes the relationship feel scarred in a believable way. You can see it in performance details. The mother doesn't just forgive and forget. Even when she softens, you can see her bracing. The alpha doesn't just apologize and become healed. Even when he tries, you can see him fighting his instincts. Those microfights are where the actors earn the story. Without them, it would be just plot. Now, I also want to acknowledge something about pacing and repetition, because I know this is where some viewers will throw their hands up. The drama cycles through tension beats. It will let the leads get close, then pull them apart. It will hint at truth, then delay. It will build a misunderstanding, then partially resolve it, then build a new one. That cycle can feel like a treadmill if you're not invested in the emotional detail. But if you are invested, the treadmill becomes the point. Because emotional healing isn't linear. It's circular. You revisit the same wound from new angles. You think you're over it. Then something triggers you and you're back in it. The show mirrors that pattern. Whether you find it profound or annoying depends on your tolerance for slow-burn emotional realism inside melodrama packaging. Wait has something that made me laugh in spite of myself. The alpha's sheer confidence that his feelings should reorder the universe. There's this entitlement that is so genre-typical, and sometimes the show plays it straight, but sometimes it lets it look ridiculous. Like, sir, you cannot decree trust. You cannot command forgiveness. You cannot issue a royal proclamation and expect someone's nervous system to relax. And watching him run into that wall repeatedly is, in a dark way, satisfying. It's like watching a lion try to open a jar. Powerful, confused, offended. And yes, I hear myself. I'm comparing an alpha werewolf leader to a lion with a jar. This is what this show does to my brain. The jealousy beats, too, often function as diagnostic tests. When the alpha gets jealous, it exposes what he thinks he owns. When others get jealous, it exposes what they think they deserve. When the mother reacts to jealousy, it exposes what she fears losing. And because the child is the ultimate thing to lose, jealousy becomes radioactive. It's not just romantic insecurity. It's existential. Wait, let's talk about the pack's internal enemies again. Because I think the show's best tension comes from inside the system rather than outside it. The alpha's enemies aren't just random outsiders. They're people who are close enough to know where the cracks are. They know his pride. They know his vulnerabilities. They know his blind spots. They know the narrative he needs to maintain. And that makes the conspiracies feel intimate, like betrayal from within, which is always more painful than attack from without. The show also does this thing where it makes you feel the alpha's loneliness, not as a sad boy aesthetic, but as a structural consequence of power. When you're the leader, everyone wants something from you. Everyone is performing. You can't tell who's sincere. That's why the mother's refusal matters so much. She's not performing for him in the same way. She's not trying to climb. She's trying to survive. That difference is magnetic to him, and it's also threatening, because it means she can't be bought with the usual currencies of status and favor. Wait, this is where the show's revenge theme becomes more complex. The mother's refusal is a kind of revenge, but it's also a kind of honesty. She's telling him, with her actions, that he doesn't get to rewrite the past. That's a refusal of narrative control. And the alpha, who lives by narrative control, experiences that refusal as violence. Not physical violence, but ego violence. Identity violence. It shakes him. Now, if you're a critic type, you might look at this and say the show is just romanticizing toxic dynamics. And I won't pretend that critique is baseless. The show flirts with romanticizing intensity. It sells obsession as passion sometimes. It leans into the fantasy of dominance. But I think it's more interesting than a simple toxic label because it also shows the harm. It shows the fear. It shows the way dominance corrodes intimacy. It shows the way obsession can erase another person's autonomy. And the mother's arc keeps pulling against the romanticization. So what you're left with is a messy text, not a clean moral fable. A messy text that invites argument. Wait, here's my personal confession moment. And I'm saying this because it genuinely changed how I watched the show. There were scenes where the alpha would press for access. Access to the mother, access to the child, access to the truth. And I could feel my own stress response kick up. Like shoulders tight, jaw tight. Because I've known that feeling in other contexts, that sense of someone trying to push past a boundary because they believe their need matters more than your no. And watching the mother hold the line, even imperfectly, was weirdly cathartic. It wasn't just entertainment. It was like watching a boundary I wish I'd had earlier in my own life. Not the circumstances, obviously. No pack politics in my past, thank God. But the emotional shape of it, that hit. And that's why, for me, the show's emotional stakes work. Because underneath the werewolf alpha fantasy, it's a story about boundaries under pressure. It's a story about autonomy versus entitlement. It's a story about whether love can exist without possession. And those questions are real, even if the setting is heightened. Wait, let's pivot to the child's role again as a mirror, because this is where the show does something that I think is genuinely effective. It uses the child to reveal the adult's capacity for patience. Patience is the rarest resource in this drama. Everyone is impatient. Everyone wants immediate outcomes. Everyone wants control now. But children require patience. They require listening. They require repetition. They require care without immediate reward. And watching adults who are addicted to power struggle with that is fascinating. The mother has developed patience through necessity. You can feel it in her routines, her carefulness, her ability to stay calm on the surface even when she's terrified. The alpha has not developed patience in the same way. He's developed strategy, dominance, decisiveness. Those are not the same muscles. So when he's confronted with the reality of a child, it becomes a test. Can he slow down? Can he listen? Can he handle a relationship that doesn't respond to authority? And then, layered on top of that, the pack is watching. The pack is always watching. So the alpha's fatherhood becomes performance? Too. People will interpret his behavior toward the child as a political statement. And the mother knows that, which makes her even more cautious. Because if the alpha claims the child publicly, the child becomes a symbol. If he doesn't, the child becomes vulnerable. Again, no clean move. Wait, here's where the show's music choices become sneaky. It will sometimes score scenes involving the child with a kind of fragile warmth, like the show wants you to feel hope. And then it will undercut that hope with an abrupt shift when the pack politics intrude. That push-pull is emotionally manipulative, yes, but it's also accurate to the mother's experience. Hope is dangerous when it makes you careless. So the show trains you to distrust your own relief. It's kind of mean. It's also effective. Now, I want to talk about the alpha's empire as a space, because the show uses space as character. The pack's power spaces, big rooms, long corridors, open areas that make you feel exposed, contrast sharply with the mother's smaller, more contained spaces. In the pack spaces, people are staged like they're in a ceremony. In the mother's space, life is staged like life. Messy, repetitive, intimate. That spatial contrast reinforces the central conflict. The mother's life is about care. The pack's life is about control. Wait, because there's a moment later on, again, I'm staying broad, where the mother is pulled closer to the pack's world, whether by necessity or confrontation or strategy. And the shift in visual language is striking. The show starts framing her differently. She looks smaller in the frame, more watched, more vulnerable, even if she's still strong. You feel the environment swallowing her. And that, to me, is one of the most effective uses of cinematography in the drama. It makes you feel the cost of leaving the private world she built. It's not just plot, it's atmosphere. Now, about the revenge element. The mother's revenge is, in many ways, about refusing to be erased. But the alpha's revenge is about rooting out betrayal within his own empire. Those revenge arcs run parallel and sometimes intersect in uncomfortable ways. The alpha might do something that is strategically smart in terms of punishing enemies, but emotionally disastrous in terms of rebuilding trust with the mother. And the mother might do something strategically smart in terms of protecting her child, but emotionally disastrous in terms of giving the alpha any reason to believe in reconciliation. That's the tragedy. They're both making survival choices, but survival choices don't always align with love. Wait, this is where the show's misunderstandings become almost cruelly inevitable. Because when you're making survival choices, you don't always communicate. You don't always have time. You don't always trust the person you'd need to communicate with. And the enemies in the pack exploit that. They exploit the lack of communication. They exploit the history of betrayal. They exploit pride. They exploit jealousy. It's like they're playing the couple like instruments, and the couple keeps falling into the same notes because those notes are carved into them by the past. There's also something the show does with the concept of truth that I kept thinking about. It treats truth like a living thing that changes meaning depending on context. The mother's truth is protective. The alpha's truth is possessive. The pack's truth is opportunistic. So when the truth comes out, or when pieces of it surface, it doesn't automatically lead to clarity. It leads to more conflict, because everyone interprets truth through their agenda. Wait, if you're someone who loves the emotional reunion moments, the show will feed you. But it will feed you like a cat that knocks the ball over right after you fill it. You'll get tenderness, and then you'll get sabotage. You'll get a moment where you think, okay, they're seeing each other. And then you'll get a lie that lands like acid. That's the viewing experience. It's intense. It's also why it's so bingeable. The show is basically a machine designed to keep you emotionally thirsty. Let's talk about the acting in those reunion scenes, because that's where the genre can become either transcendent or embarrassing. When it's bad, it's just people yelling and crying. When it's good, it's people trying not to yell and cry, and failing in tiny ways. This show leans into the tiny ways. The mother's controlled stillness. The alpha's restrained fury. The way they both avoid certain words like those words are landmines. The way they circle topics. That circling can feel like stalling, but it's also realistic. People with trauma don't walk straight into the wound and press down. They orbit it. Wait, here's another crafty detail. The show often uses reaction shots not for melodrama, but for surveillance. You'll have a conversation between the leads, and then the camera will cut to someone else watching or to someone hearing a fragment. Those reaction shots are like little reminders that privacy is a fantasy, and that changes how you read the romance. The romance isn't happening in a vacuum. It's happening in a fishbowl. Now, one thing I want to push back against, because I've seen this kind of critique often, the idea that the female-led's secrecy is unforgivable. In a real-world ethical sense, hiding a child's existence from a parent is complicated, obviously. But within the logic of this story's world, pack politics, internal enemies, power struggles, the alpha's control tendencies, the secrecy reads as a survival strategy. The show is asking you to consider what safety looks like when the parent you're hiding from is also the center of a dangerous system. The mother isn't hiding because she's petty. She's hiding because visibility is dangerous. Wait, this is where the drama's romantic revenge label becomes important. Revenge isn't just about punishing. It's about reasserting agency. It's about rewriting the power dynamic. And secrecy is a form of agency in a world that tries to strip agency from women. That doesn't make it morally clean. It makes it emotionally comprehensible. And I think the show wants you in that uncomfortable space, understanding without endorsement. The alpha's obsession, too, is framed in ways that invite both attraction and discomfort. The show knows that the fantasy of being wanted that intensely can feel intoxicating. It also knows that in reality, being pursued by someone powerful who doesn't respect your boundaries is terrifying. The drama plays both sides. Sometimes it leans into the fantasy. Sometimes it shows the fear. That oscillation is part of why the show feels like it's arguing with itself, and honestly, that's part of why it's interesting to talk about. Wait, let's talk about claiming, because the word is doing a lot of thematic heavy lifting here. The alpha's world is built on claims. Claiming territory, claiming loyalty, claiming status, claiming mate, claiming heir. Claiming is the verb of power. The mother's world is built on care. Feeding, soothing, teaching, hiding, protecting. Care is the verb of survival. Claiming and care collide. And the show keeps asking, can claiming ever look like care? Or does claiming always corrupt care into ownership? When the alpha tries to win her back, the show makes it clear that his idea of winning is not necessarily her idea of returning. He's thinking in terms of conquest because that's his language. She's thinking in terms of trust because that's her requirement. So winning becomes a misalignment. He can win battles. He can't win trust. Trust is given, not taken. And that's the core lesson he keeps failing until he doesn't. Or until he does, partially. The show doesn't give you easy transformation. It gives you struggle. Wait, there are moments in the later stretch where you can feel the alpha starting to understand that control isn't the same as safety. And the way the actor plays that understanding is subtle. It's not a big speech. It's more like a pause. A hesitation before he issues a command. A moment where he chooses not to force something. And it's small, but it's huge. Because for someone like him, choosing not to control is an act of vulnerability. It's an act of trust. He's trusting that he won't be betrayed if he loosens his grip. That's terrifying in his world. And the mother, when she sees that loosening, doesn't immediately melt. She doesn't immediately reward him. Which, again, I appreciate. Because that's realistic. If someone has hurt you deeply, a single moment of restraint doesn't erase the pattern. You watch for consistency. You watch for relapse. You watch for the moment the mask slips. The mother's cautiousness is not cruelty. It's wisdom. Wait, this is where the show's emotional tension becomes almost unbearable. You start rooting for him to change, but you also start fearing what his change will cost him in his world. Because if he becomes softer, he becomes vulnerable to pack enemies. If he becomes vulnerable, the mother and child become targets. So even if love could heal him, love could also destroy them. That's the tragedy of power. Love is both salvation and weakness. Now, about the supporting cast. Again, I'm not inventing specific characters, but the show clearly populates the pack with different types. Loyalists, opportunists, rivals, conspirators, people who genuinely believe in tradition, people who cynically use tradition. Those types create friction around the leads. The show uses them to externalize internal conflict. When the mother doubts the alpha, it's not just her fear, it's also reinforced by the way others treat her. When the alpha doubts himself, it's not just his guilt, it's also reinforced by betrayal within his circle. The world is constantly validating their worst assumptions. Wait, let's talk about misunderstandings as a love language inversion. In a healthy relationship, you build shared meaning through conversation. In this drama, shared meaning is sabotaged constantly, so the couple's relationship is built through conflict. They recognize each other through anger, through jealousy, through hurt. That's toxic. Yes, it's also compelling storytelling because it creates this sense of inevitability. Like, no matter how far they run, their emotional patterns find each other again. And the show seems aware that that inevitability is not automatically romantic. It's a trap as much as it is a pull. There's also something about the way the show frames the mother's independence that I want to highlight. It doesn't frame her independence as she doesn't need anyone. It frames it as she learned not to rely. Those are different. Doesn't need is a flex. Learned not to rely is a wound. And the show, in its quieter moments, treats that wound with respect. You can feel that she might want partnership, might want support, might want tenderness. But she doesn't trust the world to allow her to have it safely. So she chooses self-sufficiency. That's heartbreaking. Wait, this is where the child becomes not just a mirror, but a third perspective on love. A child doesn't understand pack politics. A child understands presence, tone, safety, routine. And the adult's drama is constantly threatening those basics. So the child becomes a silent moral compass. Not in a preachy way, but in a structural way. Every time the adults escalate, you feel the risk to the child's emotional world. That raises the stakes beyond romance. It becomes about what kind of environment this kid will grow up in. And the show uses that to make certain scenes feel almost unbearable. When the mother is forced into packed spaces, you can feel her calculating how to keep the child from absorbing the hostility. When the alpha is confronted with his own enemies, you can feel his anger battling with the knowledge that rage will ripple outward. The child forces both of them to consider consequences in a way they might not if it were just two adults having a messy romance. Wait, let's shift to the revenge theme again, because I think this is where the show's emotional complexity really lies. Revenge is often portrayed as empowerment, but revenge can also be a chain. It keeps you tethered to the person who hurt you. It keeps you thinking in terms of the past. The mother's revenge, if we call it that, is partly about moving on, about building a life where the alpha's choices don't define her. But the alpha's re-entry into her life threatens that. It drags her back into a story she thought she'd exited. So revenge becomes complicated. Is her revenge to keep him out forever, or is her revenge to make him confront what he did while still refusing to surrender herself? And the alpha's revenge, meanwhile, is directed at his enemies, but it also spills into his relationship with the mother. Because when you're in a revenge mindset, you see everyone as either ally or enemy. You see information as ammunition. You see vulnerability as weakness. That mindset is poison for intimacy. So the alpha is trying to pursue love while drinking poison. And the show doesn't let him avoid the consequences of that. Wait, here's another personal reaction I had. I found myself unexpectedly protective of the mother's peace. Like, I would watch the alpha move toward her world, and I'd feel this immediate, visceral, don't ruin it. Even when I understood why he was drawn to them, even when I could see his longing, I still felt that instinct. And I think that means the show succeeded at making the mother's independent life feel valuable. It wasn't just a placeholder until romance resumed. It was a real life worth defending. That's not always easy in a genre that tends to treat the heroine's life away as a waiting room. Now, for fans of the genre who are here for the emotional reunions, the show delivers some scenes that feel like emotional car crashes in slow motion. Scenes where you can see the moment something goes wrong before it goes wrong. The actor's timing is key there. The way a line is delivered slightly too sharply. The way someone pauses too long before answering. The way someone's pride flares. Those micro moments are where misunderstandings are born. And because the show has trained you to expect sabotage, you're watching every gesture for signs of danger. That makes the viewing experience intense. You're not passive. You're scanning. Wait, let's talk about the show's use of hidden truths. Because it's not just the baby. It's layers. People hide motives. People hide alliances. People hide betrayals. People hide feelings. The show uses hidden truth as a structural principle. Everyone is masking something because everyone is afraid of being exploited. And that creates an environment where sincerity is rare and therefore powerful. When someone is sincere, it's like a flare in the dark. It draws attention. It can be beautiful. It can also get you killed, metaphorically or literally depending on how the story plays. That's why the few moments of genuine tenderness between the leads hit so hard. Because you can feel how risky they are. Tenderness is evidence. Tenderness can be used against you. Tenderness can be interpreted as weakness. And yet, they keep reaching for it, sometimes clumsily, sometimes desperately. It's like watching two people trying to hold water in their hands. Wait, here's something that might surprise people. I actually think the show is at its most romantic when it's least sexy. When it's not doing dominance talk. When it's doing quiet accountability. When the alpha is forced to listen. When the mother allows herself a moment of softness without immediately punishing herself for it. Those are the moments where love feels like care rather than possession. And those moments are rarer, which makes them more valuable. Now, a word about the werewolf alpha theme. It's less about literal supernatural mechanics and more about the social metaphor of hierarchy. The alpha is basically patriarchy with abs. And the mother is basically autonomy with a heartbeat. That's the show. So if you're here for complicated lore, you might not get that. If you're here for power dynamics explored through fantasy, you'll find a lot to chew on. Wait, there's also something the show does with the idea of smell and instinct and recognition that's common in werewolf romance. But even when it's not overt, it's present in the way the characters react to each other. There's this sense of inevitability, of bodily memory, of attraction that isn't purely intellectual. And that matters because it complicates the mother's autonomy. It's not that she doesn't feel drawing. It's that she refuses to let that draw override her judgment. That's a powerful portrayal of desire under discipline. And the alpha, when he's drawing, often interprets draw as entitlement. Because in his worldview, instinct equals right. If he feels it, it must be true and must be acted upon. The mother's worldview is the opposite. If she feels it, she checks it against safety. That clash creates a lot of the drama's friction. Desire versus discernment. Wait, let's dig into the show's use of misunderstanding again, because it's not just about words. It's about timing. It's about who arrives when. It's about who sees what fragment. It's about who chooses to interpret something in the worst possible way because it protects them from hope. The mother often interprets the alpha's actions through the lens of past betrayal. The alpha interprets the mother's secrecy through the lens of wounded pride. Those lenses distort everything, and the pack conspirators know it. They feed the distortions. That's why, when the show gives you a moment where one of them chooses a different lens, chooses to interpret generously, chooses to ask a question instead of assuming, it feels like a miracle. Not because it fixes everything instantly, but because it breaks the pattern for 1 second. And in a story built on patterns, breaking the pattern is a huge emotional event. Wait, here's where the show's editing deserves praise again. It often cuts on decision points. It will hold on a face right as a character is deciding whether to speak truth or stay silent. And then it cuts away. That cut is cruel, but it's also thematically accurate. The characters don't get to live in their decision points. The world interrupts them. The pack interrupts them. Duty interrupts them. So the editing makes you feel that interruption. It's like the show is saying, you don't get to have clean catharsis here. Neither do they. Now, I want to talk about the show's emotional temperature. It's hot. It's intense. But it's not constantly screaming. It knows when to simmer. And the simmer is sometimes more painful than the explosion. The simmer is the mother sitting in silence after a confrontation, staring at nothing because she's calculating next steps. The simmer is the alpha standing alone in a big room after hearing something that shakes him, trying to maintain composure because someone might be watching. The simmer is the child existing as innocence in a world of strategy. Wait, this is where I think the show's title misleads people in a way that might actually work in its favor. The title sounds like pure sensationalism. And yes, there is sensationalism. But there's also a surprisingly grounded portrayal of maternal care as labor and as intimacy. The nursing element, for instance, isn't just a shock. It's a depiction of the mother's bond with the child as something the alpha cannot replicate or control. He can claim, but he cannot nurse. He can protect, but he cannot provide that specific kind of bodily care. That difference destabilizes his sense of ownership. It reminds him there are forms of power he doesn't have. That's fascinating. And for the mother, nursing is also a reminder of dependence. The child depends on her. She is responsible. That responsibility shapes every choice. So when the alpha enters the picture, it's not just romance. It's an intrusion into a bond that has sustained her. That's why the tension is so high. The alpha isn't just competing with rivals. He's competing with a relationship that already exists and is already complete in its own way. Wait has another contrarian angle. I don't think the show's central fantasy is the alpha wins the girl. I think the deeper fantasy is the mother survives the alpha, survives the system, survives the betrayal, builds a life, keeps her child safe. And then, if romance happens, it happens on her terms. The show flirts with the alpha winning, but it keeps returning to the mother's survival as the real triumph. That's why, even when the romance is messy, the story feels empowering in a way some similar titles don't. Now, let's be honest. The show also loves drama for drama's sake sometimes. There are moments where you can feel the writers reaching for maximum chaos. Jealousy eruptions, timed reveals, conspiracies that trigger at the exact worst second. It's heightened. It's not subtle. But the show's strength is that it usually ties that chaos to emotional truth. The chaos isn't random. It's targeted. It's aimed at the character's vulnerabilities. So even when it's ridiculous, it's emotionally coherent. Wait, this is where I want to talk about the alpha's empire again as a metaphor for masculinity under pressure. The alpha is expected to be decisive, ruthless, unyielding. Those expectations make tenderness risky. And the show is basically asking, what happens when a man trained to be unyielding is confronted with a child, which requires yielding? What happens when he's confronted with a woman who refuses to be owned? What happens when the only way to keep them safe might be to dismantle parts of the system that gave him power? That's the real question under the romance. And that's why the internal pack enemies matter so much. They represent the system fighting back. If the alpha changes, he threatens the old order. The conspirators aren't just jealous, they're ideological. They want the alpha to remain a certain kind of leader. They want the pack to remain a certain kind of hierarchy. Wait, let's talk about the show's atmosphere again, Because it's doing something very specific with tone. It makes domesticity feel like a sanctuary and a liability at the same time. Sanctuary, because it's the only place the mother can breathe. Liability, because sanctuaries can be invaded. The show shoots those domestic scenes with warmth, but not with total comfort. There's always an edge, like the warmth could be snuffed out by one wrong knock on the door. And the way it uses space, this is a craft thing I could go on about forever, isn't just aesthetic. It's moral. Big pack rooms make people look small because the system is bigger than them. Tight domestic spaces make care feel intimate because care happens up close. The show keeps toggling between those spaces to remind you what's actually at stake. Not just romance, but the ability to live a life that belongs to you. Wait, because the title's possessive language keeps haunting that space conversation. His baby. It's such a loaded phrase. It's biologically factual in one sense, but socially and emotionally it's contested. The mother has been his baby's entire world. She has done the labor. She has been present. So when the alpha arrives and the narrative starts flirting with possession, you can feel the mother's silent scream. Presence matters. Labor matters. Time matters. You don't get to show up late and call it yours like you planted a flag. That's why the show's best tension isn't the chase. It's the moral argument happening without speeches. The mother's very existence is an argument. You can't replace time with authority. The alpha's very existence is a counter-argument. Authority can rewrite reality if you push hard enough. And the story sits in that collision. Wait, here's where I want to give the show credit for something that's easy to overlook. It understands that revenge doesn't always look like sabotage. Sometimes revenge looks like refusing to let someone see you bleed. The mother's revenge is often emotional opacity. She keeps her face calm, she keeps her voice steady, she gives the alpha nothing to grab onto. And if you've ever dealt with someone who feeds on your emotional reaction, you know exactly why that's powerful. But the show also shows the cost of that strategy. Emotional opacity protects you, but it also makes you lonely. It makes you unreachable. It creates a world where no one can help you because they can't see what you need. And there are moments where you can feel her wanting to be seen and refusing it at the same time. That double impulse is so human it hurts. Wait, because people always talk about second chance romance like it's inherently comforting. And I'm like, second chances are terrifying. Second chances mean reopening a door you fought hard to close. Second chances mean risking the same wound twice. And claimed by the alpha, nursing his baby actually leans into that fear. It doesn't treat reconciliation as a warm bath. It treats it like walking back into a house that burned down and trying to live there again. The show also uses jealousy in a way that, when it's done well, feels less like petty drama and more like a symptom of insecurity. The alpha gets jealous because he's terrified of being replaced, not just romantically but emotionally. He missed yours. He knows he missed them, so he tries to compensate with intensity. The mother experiences jealousy differently, less about possession, more about threat. If someone else becomes close to the alpha, what does that mean for her safety? For her child's safety? Jealousy becomes another danger signal. Wait, there is scene energy the show keeps returning to where the mother is forced to be in proximity to pack members who are politely hostile. Smiles that don't reach the eyes. Compliments that are actually warnings. Questions that sound casual but are actually interrogations. Those moments are some of the most stressful to watch because they're so recognizable. You can't punch politeness. You can't accuse someone of hostility when they're smiling. You just have to endure it. And the mother endures it like someone who's done it before. And the show's editing often supports that by cutting to tiny reaction shots, someone's eyes narrowing, someone's smile tightening, so you feel the hostility that the dialogue is trying to hide. It's like the show is whispering to you, don't trust this. Don't relax. And you don't. You can't. Wait, because here's the other major theme I think the show is obsessed with: the tension between belonging and freedom. The pack offers belonging, but it's conditional. The mother chooses freedom, but it's lonely. The alpha is the embodiment of belonging as control. He believes people belong to the pack, to him, to the hierarchy. The mother is the embodiment of freedom as survival. She believes belonging is dangerous when it's enforced. And the show keeps asking, can they build a version of belonging that isn't control? Can the alpha imagine family without ownership? Can the pack tolerate an heir who is loved privately rather than claimed publicly as a political symbol? Those questions keep bubbling under the romance. And I think they're why the show has more bite than the average alpha finds secret baby story. Wait, let me talk about the show's use of obsession one more time. Because I don't think it's just a character trait. I think it's a structural commentary on power. Powerful people often believe that wanting something is the same as deserving it. The alpha has lived his entire life in an environment that reinforces that. Want a thing, take a thing. Want loyalty, demand loyalty. Want respect, enforce respect. So when he wants the mother and child, his first impulse is to apply the same logic. The show makes you watch him learn, slowly, painfully, that love cannot be enforced without becoming something else. And that learning curve is why I can't fully dismiss the alpha as just a fantasy jerk. He's a fantasy jerk, yes, but he's also a case study in what it looks like when a person's tools are wrong for the task. He's trying to build a house with a sword. It's dramatic. It's ridiculous. It's sometimes hot in a genre way. It's also sad. Wait, because the mother's tools are wrong sometimes too. She's trying to build a future with a shield permanently strapped to her arm. She can't put it down, even when she needs to hold something else, even when she needs to reach. The shield keeps her safe, but it also keeps her from intimacy. Watching her negotiate when to hold and when to lower is, to me, the real slow burn. The show's pacing reflects that. It doesn't allow quick breakthroughs because quick breakthroughs would be dishonest. This isn't a story where one heartfelt speech fixes trauma. This is a story where trust is rebuilt in tiny, repetitive moments, and then shattered again by an external plot wave, and then rebuilt again. That can feel like wheel spinning, but it can also feel like realism wrapped in melodrama. Wait, here's another subtle craft choice I liked. When the show wants you to feel the pack's power, it often uses wider frames and keeps characters at a distance from each other, like the room itself is separating them. When it wants you to feel intimacy, it compresses the space and brings faces closer. But it doesn't always do it in a romantic way. Sometimes the close-up is claustrophobic. Sometimes intimacy feels like a trap. That's a smart way to keep the romance from feeling purely safe. And because this is a romantic revenge drama, it's constantly playing with the fantasy of being chosen. The mother wants to be chosen in a way that doesn't erase her. The alpha wants to choose in a way that asserts his identity. The pack wants the alpha to choose in a way that maintains order. Everybody is fighting over choice. Who gets to choose whom? Who gets to choose the future? Who gets to choose what the child means? That's the battleground. Wait, because the child's identity being hidden is the ultimate disruption of choice. The mother made a choice alone that the alpha didn't consent to. That's part of what enrages him. But the mother made that choice because she believed the alpha's world would remove her choices. So the secret becomes a preemptive strike against anticipated control. That's morally complicated. It's messy, and the show doesn't clean it up for you, which is why people argue about it. If you want a contrarian take that might irritate both sides of the debate, here it is. I don't think the mother's secrecy is purely heroic, and I don't think the alpha's outrage is purely villainous. I think both are the logical outcome of a world where the system is designed to make private life impossible. The mother is doing what she thinks she must. The alpha is reacting the way someone reacts when they realize their power has limits. And the tragedy is that the system therein makes it hard for either of them to act cleanly. Everyone's choices are compromised. Wait, another thing that kept me thinking is how the show uses misunderstanding not just as plot, but as emotional inheritance. People inherit misunderstandings like heirlooms in this story. Old lies become accepted truths. Old betrayals become default assumptions. The mother assumes the alpha will always prioritize power. The alpha assumes the mother's secrecy is a personal attack. Those assumptions have been reinforced by years and by pack whispers. So when new information arrives, it gets filtered through those inherited misunderstandings. That's why clarity is so hard to achieve. And the show sometimes visualize that filtering by shooting scenes through barriers, door frames, curtains, reflections, windows, anything that suggests you're not seeing the full picture. That's not just style, it's theme. Nobody is seeing the full picture. Everyone is looking through something. Wait, this is where the show's title becomes almost a dare. It dares you to accept a possessive framing. It dares you to root for claiming. And then it shows you the collateral damage of claiming. Not always with a moral lecture, but with consequences that linger. The mother's fear, the alpha's rage, the pack's opportunism, the child's vulnerability. That's the dare. Can you enjoy the fantasy while acknowledging the cost? The answer is different for every viewer. For me, I enjoyed it most when the show leaned into the cost. When it didn't just sell intensity as romance, but showed intensity as a symptom of damage. Those were the moments that felt emotionally honest rather than purely indulgent. Wait, let's talk about the revenge angle again through a different lens. Revenge as reclamation of narrative. The mother is reclaiming her narrative by refusing to let the alpha's world define her. The alpha is trying to reclaim his narrative by pulling the mother and child back into his story, where he is the hero, the protector, the rightful leader, the rightful father. The pack conspirators are trying to rewrite his narrative entirely by undermining him. Everyone is in a narrative war. And the show is basically saying, love is not just feeling, it's story. Who gets to tell the story matters. That's why the show is so obsessed with public versus private. Public story is the pack's domain. Private story is the mother's sanctuary. When those collide, it's not just romance drama. It's identity crisis. Wait, here's something else I want to acknowledge, because it's part of why the show gets under your skin. It plays with the fantasy of being pursued relentlessly, and it also plays with the fear of being pursued relentlessly. Those are two sides of the same coin. The show toggles between them depending on framing, music, and whose perspective it privileges in a scene. When it's from the alpha's perspective, pursuit looks like devotion. When it's from the mother's perspective, pursuit looks like danger. That perspective shift is the difference between romance and thriller. And the fact that the show can do that shift without changing the basic plot is what makes it interesting craft-wise. It's not rewriting events, it's rewriting meaning. It's reminding you that meaning is perspective, and perspective is power. Wait, because if you're still watching at this point, you're probably asking, okay, but does the show ever let them have happiness? And I'm not going to answer that directly because moderate spoilers, but I will say, the show is far more interested in earned softness than in easy bliss. When it gives you comfort, it tends to make you feel like it came at a price. And honestly, that's the only way comfort would feel true in a story like this. If it handed you a tidy, cozy ending without addressing the system, it would feel like a lie. Now, I want to zoom in on something that I think makes the show feel 2026 in a good way. Even though it's working with a tropey premise, it's more comfortable than older genre entries with letting the female lead be morally complicated without punishing her as a person. She's not perfect. She makes choices that hurt. She can be stubborn. She can be sharp. But the show doesn't frame that as her deserving suffering. It frames it as her being human in an impossible situation. That's a shift. That's a quiet evolution in how these stories are told. Wait, on the flip side, the show is also more willing than some older entries to portray the alpha's dominance as something that needs transformation, not just acceptance. It doesn't always go far enough for my taste, but it goes far enough that you can feel the writers trying to engage with modern audience discomfort around entitlement and control. They know we are watching with different eyes now. They know claimed doesn't automatically read as romantic to everyone. And instead of ignoring that, they weave it into the tension. That's why the show generates debate. It's not purely fantasy, not purely critique. It's this messy hybrid where you can enjoy the intensity and still feel uneasy. And that unease is part of the experience. Wait, let me give you another vivid, more cinematic retelling of a type of scene the show nails, because I want you to feel why I keep saying atmosphere. There a confrontation scene, again, not a specific episode, just a recurring kind of moment, where the mother is forced into a pack setting, and the room itself feels like it's holding its breath. The light is cooler, edges sharper. The space is too big, too formal, like it's designed to make you feel small. The alpha is there, and even before he speaks, you can feel the room orient around him like iron filings to a magnet. The mother stands her ground anyway, and the camera doesn't let you forget what that costs. It catches the tiny flex of her fingers, the way she keeps her shoulders steady, the way she doesn't look down, even though every social rule in that room expects her to. There are a hum of murmurs, the soft scrape of someone shifting in their seat, like the pack itself is reacting. And then, when the alpha speaks, it's not just his voice. It's the authority behind it. The room quiets because the room is trained to quiet. And you're watching her face as she absorbs whatever he's trying to assert. You can see her weighing the options. If she defies him openly, she risks escalation. If she yields, she risks losing herself. So she chooses something in between, a boundary delivered with calm. Not loud, not disrespectful, just immovable. And the show holds on that moment long enough for you to feel how radical it is in that world to say no without shouting. Wait, because that kind of scene is why I can't fully write the show off as just trope soup. Trope soup doesn't care about the physics of power like that. Trope soup doesn't stage refusal as suspense. This show does. It turns a woman standing still into an action scene. Now, do I wish the show sometimes moved faster? Yeah. Do I wish some misunderstandings were resolved with one honest conversation? Absolutely. But I also recognize that honest conversation is the rarest resource in this world. And the show is built around that scarcity. Wait, here's something that might sound strange. I actually think the show's occasional frustration is part of its emotional honesty. It makes you feel trapped the way the characters are trapped. Trapped by pride. Trapped by surveillance. Trapped by history. Trapped by a system that punishes vulnerability. That's why you get mad. Because you can see the exit and they can't take it. Or they won't. Or they take it and the pack blocks it. That's drama. And okay, since you asked for the final part, I'm going to let myself settle into a clearer final stance without redoing the whole verdict speech I already drifted into earlier. The truth is, I'm glad I watched this. I don't think it's a perfect show, and I don't think it always earns the intensity it demands from you. But when it hits in a way that feels primal and painfully human. It understands the terror of motherhood under threat. It understands the seduction and danger of power. It understands that love doesn't erase betrayal, it has to metabolize it. And it understands that a child turns romance into something heavier, something with a shadow. If you're the kind of viewer who loves being emotionally yanked around by a story that's equal parts romance and anxiety, this is going to scratch that itch hard. If you're someone who wants your romance to feel safe, communicative, and gentle, this is going to feel like swallowing stones. And if you're somewhere in between, if you like messy stories as long as they're messy with intention, this one is absolutely worth a try. Because even the moments that annoy you will probably make you think, and that's more than I can say for a lot of glossy trope-driven dramas. Thanks for hanging out with me on Flick Flare. If you want me to keep spelunking in these emotionally radioactive romance revenge worlds, you know what to do with the subscribe button. And if you've got a drama you're curious about, but you're not sure you want to commit, toss it my way. I'll be the designated tester. Because at the end of the day, claimed by the alpha, nursing his baby isn't just about being claimed. It's about what it takes to remain yourself when someone powerful decides you're part of his destiny, and what it costs to protect a small life when the world around you treats love like a political resource.